Welcome to part 2 of Under the Pyramids, featuring guest host Andrew Lehman and musician Reber Clark. I'm Chad Fifer, joined by my co-host Chris Lackey, and you are listening to the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast at HPPodcraft.com.
Mary, you knew my husband a long time.
Oh, yes, madame.
And you remember what he always said about these things?
That it was impossible for the dead to return.
This proves he was right. For if it would have been possible, I would have had some sign from him in the past 10 years.
HPPodcraft.com.
But when he faints, he has another crazy vision dream.
Yeah, he starts dreaming and thinking through all of those burial rites of ancient Egypt, in which he says people were sort of preparing houses, not tombs. You know, they're preparing for this afterlife.
Right. They so completely believe in the afterlife that what they're building is a place to live after they die.
Right.
Yeah, in fact, didn't they bury their servants with them and their cats and their dogs and all of
Yes,
this?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which leads to my favorite sentence in the entire story.
All these people thought of was death and the dead.
It's short.
It's like the shortest sentence in the whole story.
Yeah, exactly. And it just sounds like he's bad-mouthing some neighbors or something. And all those people think about is death and the dead. I'm sick of it. Always building tombs. But that's, a lot of, thank goodness for that preservation of their lives, because it actually has taught us a lot, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And if you think about it, people in ancient Egypt didn't live very long. 20, 30 years tops. You probably spend a lot more time being a corpse than you would being a living person.
Yeah.
Well, I think
as we all will.
that goes for everyone at all times.
Not me.
Oh, well, not you.
Yeah.
Just recently, there's some new revelations about Tutankhamun, right? How he died.
Oh, yeah, there were.
There was a whole documentary that I watched, and he was murdered? Is that what it was?
No. People have often speculated that he was murdered.
No, it turns out he had kidney disease. He had several major medical complications.
Right, he had a clubbed foot.
Yeah, they recently did
this is becoming familiar.
Yeah,
to me
they
now.
recently did like a CAT scan or something.
Yeah,
right.
And
They were able to diagnose. Yeah,
they finally identified who his father was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
information I don't have readily available right now.
It was Darth Vader.
It was Darth Vader. That's right. But then he was, he was deformed as a result of probably the inbreeding that was going on in the royal family.
Well, not just in the royal families, like all of Egypt. Marrying your sister or brother was a big deal. It was encouraged in that society. It's one of the few societies that incest was good.
Right.
It was important to them. There's some weird... I was reading a whole thing about Egypt, and that was one of those facts that really stuck with me.
That they were inbreeding a lot. Well, apparently there's lots of screwed up things that they did in ancient Egypt, one of which is that when they mummified people, sometimes they'd swap out the human head for an animal head.
What's the problem with that?
Yeah, I actually don't see the problem with that, but it disturbs, in this dreaming that Houdini's doing, he thinks it over, and it disturbs him.
Now, have they ever found any mummies actually like that, or is that just a story?
No, that's, I think, in the story, and specifically in the story, too, he says there's no evidence that's been found of it because it's been hidden, it's been buried, because it's so, it's such an abhorrent practice.
Yes.
So very decadent.
What happened to those composite mummies is not told of, at least publicly, and it is certain that no Egyptologist ever found one. The whispers of Arabs are very wild and cannot be relied upon. They even hint that old Khephren, he of the Sphinx, the second pyramid, and the yawning gateway temple, lives far underground, wedded to the ghoul queen Nitocris, and ruling over the mummies that are neither of man nor of beast. It was of these, Khephren and his consort and his strange armies of the hybrid dead, that I dreamed, and that is why I am glad the exact dream shapes have faded from my memory. My most horrible vision was connected with an idle question I had asked myself the day before when looking at the great carven riddle of the desert and wondering with what unknown depths the temple so close to it might be secretly connected. Now that question, so innocent and whimsical then, assumed in my dream a meaning of frenetic and hysterical madness. What huge and loathsome abnormality was the Sphinx originally carven to represent?
I don't know.
Well, let me tell you.
Oh. Andrew knows.
I don't know either.
Houdini has the most exposition-laden dreams I've ever heard of. So when Houdini finally comes to, the rope that had buried him, gone. It's just gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody removed it, he speculates.
And in the process gave him a whole batch of fresh new wounds. bones.
Yeah.
As though some bird had been pecking at him or something.
Yeah.
Yeesh.
Really strange.
But that kind of steels him up because he thinks, look, if there's physical things around here, I can take them. This I can do.
Right, yeah. That he felt confident he could deal with.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then again, he starts doing what he does best. He makes with the escape.
Escape!
And it takes all of his skill and then some to get loose because, again, these are some tight bounds. But when he does, he's pretty exhausted. He's got to lay there for a while. He finds that wherever he is, it's completely black. Mm-hmm. And, when he finally gets up enough energy to start roaming around, he doesn't want to walk at random.
No.
So he heads towards that putrescent smell.
That breeze. There's a breeze.
Because he figures that smell's got to be coming from somewhere, and if there's an opening anywhere in the world, Houdini figures he can get through it.
Exactly. But soon he realizes that the smell is so bad, the wind is doubtless taking him towards a greater abyss because it's not the clean smelling wind of the desert.
Right.
But he doesn't want to retrace his steps and get lost, so he says he thinks it's better to find the source of this wind, use it as a landmark, and kind of go from there.
Because then he'll be able to find a wall, and then he can trace the wall to in the other direction and find the way out.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, as he gets closer to that wind, he trips. There's an unexpected step, and he falls down this huge flight of stone stairs. Mm-hmm. And here he leaves the story, and he skips it ahead a bit and says, sometimes he thinks back on this whole thing with humor.
Uh-huh.
And he thinks maybe I never fainted, maybe this whole thing was one big coma. He says, like one big fainting spell, starting with him getting lowered into the pit and ending with him stretched out in the sand.
Well, and he says in this paragraph too that the constables basically said that there was an entrance where the bars were bent to the side where that he could have come out of, so that he was somehow he made his way out of there, even though he doesn't remember exactly how.
And this is where Lovecraft typically sabotages himself as a storyteller, in that he gives away the ending here in the middle of the story. He lets us know that it all comes out okay, Houdini gets out,
right,
and everything's going to be fine. So he kills any chance of suspense by telling the end of the story now instead of waiting for later.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And he does that a lot.
And
it's because I presume it's because he wants the last line to be that big, shocking, mind-blowing revelation.
Yeah.
So
right.
he blows it now so that he can have his mind-blowing revelation be the last line of the story.
Well, and also, too, the narrators of the story it's in first person, and they're telling a story.
Right.
So obviously,
that's always the case that Lovecraft sabotages the suspense.
Because they have to live because they're telling the story.
Otherwise, how can they? And of course, if it's Harry Houdini, you know perfectly well that Harry Houdini's alive and kicking in 1924. So
yes.
Yeah. Although it would be great if sometime he ended a paragraph with the italicized sentence, by the way, I'm writing this while I'm dead. Even in the story, I think he's conscious of Andrew's criticism, so he admits, I'm sorry I digressed. Let's get back to the story. And he says, the smell was much worse down these stairs. And maybe it's time to stop going towards this wind and get the heck out of here.
Yeah.
So he starts trying to climb away from it. And as he's feeling around, he feels that he's at the base of these gigantic columns.
Well, he feels that there's the hieroglyphics, like when he feels the walls.
Yeah.
He can feel that there's carvings in the walls and on the pillars.
Right, yeah. There's some structures down here.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And worse still, he starts to become aware of these sounds. He says,
that they were very ancient and distinctly ceremonial, I felt almost intuitively. In their rhythmic piping, droning, rattling, and beating, I felt an element of terror beyond all the known terrors of Earth. Then I began to hear, faintly and far off, a morbid, millennial tramping of the marching things. It was hideous that footfalls so dissimilar should move in such perfect rhythm. The training of unhallowed stalking, rumbling, lumbering, crawling, and all to the abhorrent discords of those mocking instruments. And then, God keep the memory of those Arab legends out of my head, the mummies without souls, the meeting place of the wandering Khas, the hordes of the devil-cursed pharaonic dead of 40 centuries, the composite mummies led through the uttermost onyx voids by King Khephren and his ghoul queen Nitocris.
the wandering Khas? What does that mean?
The Egyptian conception of life and the afterlife, you had a body and you had a soul and you had a Ka. Mm-hmm. And the Ka was part of your personhood that survived the death of your physical body and had to be taken care of and appeased by your relatives. And it was depicted in pictures as a bird with a human head.
Oh. Right, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And it's just sort of part of your personhood that survives death.
And it could possibly return to your mummified physical body.
And reanimate if your body was properly preserved and mummified, then your Ka could re-enter it and drive you like a zombie to stagger around. There's one passage in there where Lovecraft as Houdini is describing the fear that he felt. And, we know that Houdini sort of objected to the depiction of him as fainting or being afraid, because it's like his whole professional reputation depended on him never fainting or being afraid. He was too manly for any of that. But Lovecraft describes the fear as being unrelated to any, sense of personal fear, that it was a sense of pity for the planet.
Yeah.
And that's like such a deliciously Lovecraftian concept of, that's Lovecraft right there. So I feel nothing but pity for this entire planet when I'm down in this incredibly deep pit beneath the Sphinx, that's so big it could hold the Eiffel Tower 400 times over. That's such a Lovecraftian sentiment.
Houdini's thinking that these are those animal-headed mummy, possessed monsters of legend. Uh-huh. As they approach, they bring some light with them, and he hides behind one of these columns he feels, and in the light he sees, holy crap, these columns are enormous. Just the base of these things would dwarf the Eiffel Tower to insignificance. He really is deep underground.
Wow. Yeah. That's huge.
And they keep getting closer and closer.
I would not look at the marching things. That I desperately resolved as I heard their creaking joints and nitrous wheezing above the dead music and the dead tramping. It was merciful that they did not speak. Good God. The crazy torches began to cast shadows on the surface of those stupendous columns. Heaven take it away. Hippopotami should not have human hands and carry torches. Men should not have the heads of crocodiles.
So there's a Fantasia-esque hippopotami with torches.
I agree that men should not have crocodile heads.
Yeah, I agree.
We're all back in agreement. Houdini begins to tell himself, this is only a dream, it's only a dream. That doesn't help at all.
I know.
And then there's this giant, big, terrible sound, like a death rattle, or I think he calls it a corpse gurgle.
He actually calls it both.
Yes. Houdini opens his eyes to see that all of the terrible beasts have sort of filed in one direction and are worshipping at this aperture where the noxious wind has come from. And this opening, this giant opening, is flanked by two giant staircases. One of these was the one that he apparently fell down. This hole is huge, and the things are throwing tributes of some kind to the space. Objects which he hints are something so horrible he doesn't want to say what they are. I assume it's some kind of bodies or...
dead babies, who knows what. It's something so unspeakably
awful.
Horrible that he can't even let himself think about what it actually is.
Hummus.
What did you say?
He said hummus.
Hummus!
I love hummus. I don't know if I said that.
Yeah, hummus is delicious. If that would be an excellent way to get me out of any hole. Some hummus and some peanut chips in there. King Kefren and Queen Nitocris are there. They're leading this army of hybrid.
And it turns out King Kefren is his guide.
Yeah.
Abdul
Yeah.
Alreus Drogman.
That's right.
It turns out that unlicensed guide who set him up at the top of the pyramid is none other than King Kefren himself.
Right.
The dude that had the pyramids and the Sphinx built.
That's right.
So he had...
He's a bigwig.
He's a bigwig.
Yeah.
The
Likes
biggest.
to go among the
wiggiest.
The wiggy.
Queen Nitocris, little detail there, half of her face has been eaten away by rats. Or some other ghouls.
Yeah, he doesn't... Who
could tell?
Who knows?
You have to get pretty close to determine that it's rats.
Yeah. But he thinks, hey, if all these things are distracted with their worshipping and their obeisance, then perhaps I can climb out of here up one of those staircases while they're distracted. He carefully makes it to the base of the staircase, crawling along, and he begins to ascend. He has no intention of looking back.
No.
But he does hear another one of those big death rattle corpse gurgles, and he feels compelled to
He's
look
got to
at it.
look.
Yeah.
He can't not look.
The monstrosities were hailing something which had poked itself out of the nauseous aperture to seize the hellish fare proffered it. It was something quite ponderous, even as seen from my height, something yellowish and hairy, and endowed with a sort of nervous motion. It was as large, perhaps, as a good-sized hippopotamus, but very curiously shaped. It seemed to have no neck, but 5 separate shaggy heads springing in a row from a roughly cylindrical trunk. The first, very small, the second, good-sized, the third and fourth, equal and largest of all, and the fifth, rather small, though not so small as the first. Out of these heads started curious, rigid tentacles which seized ravenously on the excessively great quantities of unmentionable food placed before the aperture. Once in a while, the thing would leap up, a occasionally would retreat into its den in a very odd manner. Its locomotion was so inexplicable that I stared in fascination, wishing it would emerge further from the cavernous lair beneath me.
It's a strange sounding thing it's described. Rigid tentacles. I don't know. I sat and scratched my head over that for a while.
Maybe they're slightly curved. Rigid tentacles.
Sharpened, perhaps, on one end?
Maybe.
And then, of course, this thing does emerge, the whole of it. And at that sight, Houdini turns and he just gets the heck out of there. Typical Lovecraftian protagonist. He doesn't exactly recall how he escaped or what had happened, but he goes up some staircases and ladders through some M.C. Escher underground painting, and he emerges on the sands in the dawn in front of the Great Sphinx.
Where does he then lapse again into unconsciousness, and they find him later? He doesn't
really say.
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
he doesn't say.
In fact, I was going to say he was found out there, but I don't know. I think he just wakes up and he's in front of the Great Sphinx.
The Great Sphinx. God. That idle question I asked myself on that sun-blessed morning before. What huge, loathsome abnormality was the Sphinx originally carven to represent? Accursed is the sight, be it in dream or not, that revealed to me the supreme horror, the unknown god of the dead, which licks its colossal chops in the unsuspected abyss. Fed hideous morsels by soulless absurdities that should not exist. The five-headed monster that emerged. That five-headed monster, as large as a hippopotamus, the five-headed monster. And that of which it is the merest forepaw. But I survived. And I know it was only a dream.
So now you get it.
Yeah, it's the paw.
It's the paw
of the actual living
Sphinx. Yeah,
that's the end of the story.
That's the end.
Yeah,
that's a neat trick, though. There's a five-headed monster. Oh wait, that's just its hand.
Yeah. So those rigid tentacles are just claws. Coming
Yeah.
out of the end of what is basically a giant lion's paw.
I know I'm a minority in this one, but I don't care much for the story.
No,
I love Houdini, and I think that what kind of bothers me about it is that Houdini doesn't really do anything. Like, he escapes from the ropes, and then he just beats feet and sees some creepy stuff. Like, I wanted Houdini to be doing some cool stuff, like maybe punching out some things, or figuring out some way to trick some monsters, or to, but...
Chris, that's a very good point.
Lovecraft, this is how most Lovecraft stories are, where I feel like it should be more pulpy, and not so Lovecrafty. And the fact that...
Did you see that movie, Bubba Hotep?
I did.
The Don Coscarelli movie? I had the same complaint about that. You set it up where you have Elvis and John F. Kennedy fighting a mummy, and neither of them did Elvis-like or John F. Kennedy-like things.
Yeah.
Because Elvis, he knew some kung fu, he was good with guns.
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy was an excellent diplomat. They had all these skills they couldn't take to bear against the mummy. And they didn't really do it. They just reacted as two old people would to anything.
Right.
Well, to a mummy attack. But, I mean, I was disappointed in that regard.
Yeah, now that you mentioned, you get the world's greatest magician in the world's most awesome Lovecraftian setting, and all he does is faint a couple of times and run away. So, yeah, you're right. It could have been more kick-ass. It definitely could have.
That said,
it is the world's most awesome magician in the world's most awesome Lovecraftian setting.
Yes.
There are some really cool parts. Like, the whole rope thing is just genius writing. It's so cool.
This is definitely one of many examples where, to Lovecraft, it's all about the style and the word choice and the writing. Because he doesn't give a damn about plot, obviously. There's no character development. There's no arc. He even tells you the end of the story in the middle, but then he'll throw out these fantastically long descriptive passages of the escape and the stairs and the wounds and the descent and all this stuff, where what Lovecraft was interested in was the pure writing for its own sake. If you like that, you like it. If you don't, then you think, it should have been more kick-ass.
Well, I do like that, and that's one of the things I really do love about Lovecraft, but when it's...
you could have both. And we don't have both.
Yes, we don't have both. In this particular story, many times Lovecraft, he nails it. But in this particular story, it left me a little,
I also like Houdini's crew. I was sad that his wife wasn't involved in the rest of the story. And she's a very fascinating character.
Oh, in real life.
In real life. And his brother's not mentioned in here, but Houdini's got this little core group of people that he...
An entourage.
Oh, yeah. He does have an entourage.
Yeah.
He has, secret agents who work for him. And
speaking of which, Siametti was one of those
agents.
Yes,
who go and, bust up, not bust up, but go spy on seances and,
Yeah.
and report the tricks that these bogus spiritualists are using.
Right, because Houdini was way too famous to be able to go and do
Right,
these things himself.
exactly.
So he had to get other people to go in and check it out, and then they would report back, and it's like, what'd you see? And then he goes, well, she did this and this, and he goes, oh, okay, I think I know what's up with that, and I can go in and bust her, or have somebody else bust her.
Right.
Oh, he was such a cool guy. Houdini was awesome.
Lovecraft and Houdini did meet.
Yes, at least on one occasion, probably more, but we're not really sure.
It's reported that they met, but like I said at the beginning, a lot of the things that Houdini claims to have done, he never actually did. Why he would exaggerate that he met H.P. Lovecraft at dinner in Providence, there's no real reason to be boasting about that. But
from what I have read,
from what we've read,
yes.
they had dinner
They had
together
dinner.
in Providence at least once while Houdini was performing in Providence.
I read some crazy article online that had all kinds of conspiracy theories about this dinner that Lovecraft and Houdini had in September of 24.
Really?
Yeah, because Bess got very ill after the dinner.
Right. She
Right.
got terribly
Somebody
sick.
thought, well, somebody was trying to kill them because of their
So there's
occult.
a big thing that a group of psychics were trying to kill Houdini, and that he was actually assassinated. Like, he was poisoned when
Really?
he died. Oh yeah, that's this big thing.
Years after his death, his wife was still conducting seances every Halloween.
Yeah,
as
for
a
10
means
years.
of-
As a means of continuing his work of attempting to bust fake psychics to prove that, look, if it were possible to come back from the dead, my husband would have done it. And we've tried every year for 10 years, and there has been no evidence.
He had a code word.
Yeah.
That he gave her before he died.
Right.
And I don't remember. And now
That's how she would know that it was really him.
Yeah.
And she never heard the code
Nope.
word.
Never
So in
happened.
36, she called off any future seances.
Yeah.
Now, at my 30th birthday, we had a seance.
We did.
At the Magic Castle in the Houdini room. He still didn't manifest, so in a way, I carried on his work as well. Me personally.
Very good.
But we did. I mean, the table shook, and there was some unearthly presence in the room.
That's true.
Really?
There were things like that.
Who conducted
Yeah.
the seance?
I don't know.
Some guy with a goatee.
Yeah, he looked pretty
Oh,
sinister.
well, then it must have been real.
He looked pretty sinister.
It was pretty sinister.
He had a goatee.
Yeah.
On a side note, we this is Under the Pyramids, but it was originally published Imprisoned with the Pharaohs.
Oh, right.
Well, that's the title I read it under. I didn't know it was.
Yeah.
Well, check this out. The only way that we know that it was originally under the Pyramids is because Lovecraft lost the original manuscript.
And in Union Station
And
in
Union
Providence.
Station in Providence, and he put an ad out in the paper that says looking for this manuscript called Under the Pyramids, and he put in hopefully somebody would turn it into him, and never happened. So him and Sonia, he was on his way to New York to get married.
Yeah.
So him and Sonia rewrote it, like typed it up. She helped him retype it
Yeah,
up.
I think he did the first part, got married, then did the second
Yeah,
part.
So it was a working wedding, I guess.
That should have been the tip-off for Sonia right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
boy.
Well, I don't have much more. I know that we could talk about Houdini at length, but we're approaching end here. Chris, what are we doing next week?
Next week we are doing The Shunned House.
And I'll just say one more time, thank you so much to Reber Clark for providing some great music.
Reber, man, way to rock it. I'm Chris Lackey,
I'm Chad Fifer.
I'm Andrew Lehman.
and this has been the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
HPPodcraft.com.
HPPodcraft.com.